See you later. All right. So, hello, everyone. My name is Lisa, pronouns she, her. I'm really excited to be here. This is my very first Pyjamas ever. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. So, it is super early for me here. I'm literally in bed in my fancy pajamas for all of you to see. But I'm really excited for this talk, How to Talk About Mental Health Without Losing Your Mind, presented by Katschthaler, pronouns they, them. And Kai is a tech brand consultant and content specialist. And this talk is really important because we all have mental health. So I'm going to bring Kai to the stage.
Hi.
Okay. Hey, how's it going?
Good. You?
Yeah, I'm great.
I'm
I'm
not in my
great.
pajamas. I admit it's like 12:30 here, but
Yeah, it's actually like 4:30 a.m.
oh my
in
god,
Alberta right now. Yeah,
that
it's
is
pretty
impressive.
intense. So I'm gonna sleep after this, but
Good choice.
yeah, I'm really happy that you're here, and I'm gonna step back and give you the floor so that you can let us know what's up with mental health. And yeah, if anyone has any questions for Kai, you can leave it in the comments, YouTube live stream, or in our Ask Speaker channel in the Discord. So I'm going to step back, right? And Kai, go right ahead.
Thank you. Hi, welcome to my talk about mental health and how we can have a conversation about it without losing our minds. So, if you've been on the internet lately, you might have noticed that there's a lot of talk about mental health, and there's also a lot of shit talking about mental health. For example, Tom Holland recently posted a video to announce that he was going to take a break from social media for his mental health, which is a totally valid choice. And he also shared a bunch of really helpful resources in the video. But as a reaction to it, Amy Schumer decided to post her own video mocking him for it. Back in 2021, Naomi Osaka and Simone Biles both withdrew from really prestigious sporting competitions for mental health reasons, and they both faced significant public backlash for it. People were even saying things like, oh, they are letting their country down. And now, depending how old you are, you might also remember how everyone made fun of Anne Heche 20 years ago when she was found wandering around Fresno, knocking on strangers' doors and claiming she was God. The media back then called her a freak. Jay Leno called her crazy on The Tonight Show. And even Rosie O'Donnell mocked her on stage. Or maybe you've noticed just recently how people talk about Amber Heard or speculate about Ezra Miller's or Britney Spears' mental state. Because that's how we as a society talk about mental health, if we talk about it at all. Often enough, it's all hushed voices, talk behind closed doors. There's a lot of leery curiosity involved, or simply brutal judgment. But over the past few years, I've also noticed that some things, at least, are changing. Celebrities are still getting outed for their mental health struggles. That still happens. But what's fairly new is that more and more celebrities have started opening up about their mental health by choice. Many famous people are talking about their battles with depression and anxiety. Chrissy Teigen and Alanis Morissette have both spoken up about their experiences with postpartum depression. Actress Annalyn McCord has even opened up about her diagnosis with dissociative identity disorder, which is a particularly stigmatized condition. Now, I'm not famous, but I do share something with these people. I too started talking openly about my mental health experiences. And even without a huge platform, I noticed that that has changed things for the better. And not just for me, but for others as well. My name is Kai, my pronouns are they, them, and I'm a tech content specialist, sidestepping into DevRel. I also run a mental health awareness project called Tabula Rasa. And I'm going to tell you how that came about. So let's rewind to 12 years ago. I went through a mental health crisis that profoundly changed how I interacted with the world. I was 26 when my dad died very suddenly, and instead of things returning to normal after a while, my grief just cascaded into something else. Despite regular therapy, I just wasn't getting any better. I was seeing a psychiatrist at the time who floated ideas such as depression and adjustment disorder, but none of that felt right to me. And finally, I saw a different psychiatrist, and it turned out that I just had undiagnosed ADHD, which then had led to a pretty severe burnout. Grief was just the catalyst for it. The chances are high that I would have burned out anyway at some point. So I got my ADHD diagnosis, I started taking ADHD medication, and I kept going to therapy. And very slowly, very, very, very slowly, I got better. But while all this was going on, I started talking openly about how I was doing. I told friends, acquaintances, strangers. I even talked about it on social media. And I wish I could credit this to some grand idea or noble thought, but the reality is I was just simply too exhausted and burnt out to fake being okay anymore. So when someone innocently asked, "Hey, how's it going?" I would tell them, depressed, burnt out, exhausted. I was not okay, and I wasn't able to hide it anymore. Now, those poor people I had these conversations with had only used the standard greeting phrase, "How are you doing?" But there we were, suddenly having a conversation about mental health that neither of us had planned for. And I saw all kinds of reactions in that early phase. Some people were taken aback, and I understand that completely. But many, if not most of them, eventually got over their initial discomfort and started listening. And then they started talking. People started telling me about their struggles with mental health or shared that they were worried about loved ones. Maybe it was a parent with a personality disorder, a sister with ADHD, a colleague struggling with bipolar, or a child who has OCD. And as they were talking, I often saw relief flood them, relief at not having to keep this hidden anymore, at being able to tell someone, to talk about it without fearing judgment. Somehow my sharing was empowering other people to open up as well and ask for help and seek support. I'd give it what advice I had. I'd point to resources, recommend therapists and psychiatrists. I'd clear up misconceptions, or simply provide a listening ear and understanding. Sometimes that's all I could do. But I also started to notice how very little people often knew about mental health. Even now, 12 years on, with the media covering mental health topics more and more, there is still a severe lack of awareness about both mental illnesses and neurodivergence, such as ADHD and autism. There's a lot of misinformation, assumptions, and stigma attached to it all. Some of the misinformation can at least be entertaining. In the early days, when I told someone I had ADHD, they asked, "Oh, does that mean you need a lot of attention?" Because it's attention deficit disorder. And I was like, yeah, I do need a lot of attention, but that's entirely unrelated to my ADHD. So that was funny, at least to me. But other times, the lack of awareness can also lead to really hurtful actions. Someone once very loudly asked, "Have you taken your meds today?" And I don't know if they did this thoughtlessly or maliciously, but they did it in front of a group of people. And I was very uncomfortable in the situation. It's one thing for me to be open about my diagnosis, but quite another thing for someone else to weaponize that diagnosis against me, or perhaps even out me to other people. But these things happen whether there's a diagnosis or not. Sometimes it happens without a diagnosis to be weaponized. I recently was watching a reality show, and this guy asked his girlfriend, "What's up with you? Are you bipolar?" Because she was having mood swings, I guess. First of all, that's not something you should ever say to anyone. But additionally, he was also dead wrong, because those short-term mood swings are actually even a symptom of bipolar disorder. So we've got stigmatization, assumptions, and misinformation all rolled neatly into one. I do think the media is to blame for a lot of this, but we who consume the media, who arguably are the media, we're to blame as well. For one, there's a general language when talking about mental health. We talk about mental illness rather than mental health experiences, which is what I personally prefer. It's often suffering from mental illness rather than living with a mental health condition. It's committed suicide, which assigns blame rather than died by suicide. But we also throw mental health disorders around as insults. We armchair diagnose celebrities. We blame mental health experiences for bad behavior, and other times we use them as excuses for bad behavior. We make fun of symptoms and mock people who exhibit them. So how do we do better? As we established already, not talking about mental health is probably not the way. So we need to find less harmful ways to talk about it. We can work to create an environment where talking about mental health becomes a safe option, where people don't feel judged, misunderstood, or stigmatized if they open up about their mental health experiences. And one of the easiest ways that everyone can contribute is by using inclusive language. I know it sounds deceptively simple, and you're probably thinking, Kai, how on earth are the words I use going to help? But Desmond Tutu supposedly said, language is very powerful. Language does not just describe reality, language creates the reality it describes. And I totally agree with that. I think language is extremely powerful. It's one of our main ways as humans to communicate with each other. And the language I use when talking about certain things is going to tell you where I'm at. Just imagine, for example, you're queer, but not out, and you're talking to someone, and they say, ew, that's so gay. You wouldn't want to come out to this person, would you? I mean, they wouldn't feel safe to you. And similarly, we should also never use mental health conditions as adjectives either. Just like we know not to say that's okay when we don't like something, we should also learn not to say someone is so bipolar just because they were upset with us. And don't call someone borderline just because they treated you badly. We need to think of better words that actually describe what is happening rather than using mental health as a lazy shorthand to describe everyday behavior. If we're regularly calling other people crazy, psycho, lunatic, bipolar, manic, delusional, etc., we're stigmatizing mental health conditions and their symptoms. And then we're surprised that people are having a hard time getting help and treatment for their mental health. Meanwhile, changing our language is actually quite easy once we set our mind to it and become aware of it. For example, someone's crazy behavior can simply be described as irrational or unpredictable instead. The thing with language having power is that language almost always gives us an alternative we can use instead of the hurtful thing. We just have to put a little effort in. I also often hear people downplaying mental health conditions and symptoms, and that's not helpful either. Once, while I was in the middle of this pretty bad burnout, I overheard someone say, "Oh, I was so burnt out last week." And that took me aback for a second. Did this person mean to imply that they cured their burnout from last week to this? Was I taking too long? Was I doing something wrong? Was I doing burnout wrong? Or was I just being overly dramatic when I could barely manage to make myself a cup of tea without becoming completely exhausted? As everyone who's experienced burnout knows, there's no such thing as temporary burnout. If you were burnt out last week, I have really bad news for you. You will still be burnt out this week and the next. Burnout isn't cured in a week. It takes 3 to 5 years, in fact, to recover from it. So what this person did was take a serious mental health concern and use it to explain a fairly regular human experience, the feeling of exhaustion after a long week at work. So what could they have done and said instead? For example, they could have said, I was so exhausted last week, much more than usual. That doesn't downplay burnout, and they're still able to say how they're feeling and be taken seriously about it, which is also important because mental ill health encompasses so much more than just diagnosable conditions. It's also important to distinguish individual symptoms from a diagnosis. You can really like order without having OCD. There's the difference between having a depressing day and being depressed. You can be bad at reading social cues, but that alone doesn't make you autistic. So when people borrow established diagnoses as a shorthand for how they're feeling, it blurs the lines between a fleeting experience or emotion and a diagnosable mental health condition or neurodivergence that can seriously impact a person's life long term. And that too makes it harder for people who are affected to seek help and treatment because to them it seems, oh, everyone is struggling with the same things anyway. They don't realize that their situation is different or more serious. So when I explain what ADHD is, people often react with, oh, but everyone has procrastination issues. And that dismisses the struggle that someone with ADHD is facing because their procrastination issues are serious and heightened. So if someone tells you they have trouble concentrating because of their ADHD, please don't downplay that by telling them that you sometimes get distracted too. And unless you actually have OCD or suspect you do, please don't casually say, oh, I'm so OCD. Instead, consider turning it into, I like it when things are organized. As I mentioned before, mental health experiences are also often used as an explanation for bad behavior. See Ezra Miller's recent news headlines, for example. Or, like in Amber Heard's case, they're used to slander someone's character. Often enough, mental health also gets blamed for mass shootings rather than blaming the patriarchy, toxic masculinity, racism, and lack of gun control laws. These narratives inextricably tie mental health to bad behavior, and that is entirely unhelpful for people who have gotten those types of diagnoses. In my case, the mistaken assumption that ADHD meant I was a stage hog was fairly harmless mischaracterization. But the way the media has vilified Amber Heard while constantly underlining her BPD diagnosis is severely stigmatizing. And I bet it doesn't make it any easier for people who also have a personality disorder to be open about it. I do understand that people, humans, often have a need to look for reasons for all kinds of behaviors. But when we brand perpetrators with a certain mental health condition, that also stigmatizes the condition itself. If someone who has a personality disorder happens to be violent and we start talking about that as if that's inextricably connected, then all people with that same personality disorder will be confronted with way more stigma because the public will assume they're also violent. Of course, we don't have any direct control over what the media and other people do, but there are things we can do to counteract these stigmatizing conversations. For one, you can change the way you talk about mental health and make sure you separate it from bad behavior. You can stop buying and, these days, most importantly, stop sharing media that stigmatizes mental health conditions and equates them with bad behavior. And if you're feeling really, really brave, you can even start calling others out when they talk that way. All I'm asking you to do is to stop fanning the flames. It's so easy to be part of the solution and not the problem, and it's something that you can do whether you've had run-ins with mental health experiences or not. If you personally have had mental health experiences or are right in the middle of it, then please consider talking about it if you're in a safe position to do so. Be careful not to trauma dump. That's something I probably wasn't really aware of when I initially started talking about my mental health, but it's something I try to be conscious of now. What I often do now is I leave out the super gory details of my trauma and focus on the effect it has had on my life instead. And these days, I also don't randomly hit people with the topic when they're just saying hi and asking me how I'm doing. But when you find yourself in a conversation about mental health, that's your chance to bring your experiences to the table. It's an opportunity to clear up misconceptions and shine a light on people's prejudice. It's a chance to educate. And those who were previously clueless about mental health will hopefully walk away from the conversation with more awareness and more knowledge. But what's really important is that you sharing your story will be even more meaningful for those people who are also struggling with their mental health. It might just make them feel a little bit less alone when they see you're just like them. And maybe they'll feel empowered to get the support they need. And maybe they'll even find it in themselves to speak up as well at some point. These kinds of conversations can happen in person or online, but if it's not safe for you to share, then please don't. I can never emphasize enough that your safety comes first. Personally, I find sharing to be a really powerful thing. I might have started doing it by accident because I couldn't fake being okay anymore. But when I first noticed that me being honest and open about it helped counteract the silence and the misinformation, it felt kind of amazing. And I wanted to do more than just tell my own story. So in 2016, I set up a mental health awareness project called Tabula Rasa. The idea behind it is to wipe the proverbial slate clean and remove the taboos by interviewing people about their mental health experiences and sharing those. I believe the best way to create awareness and destigmatize mental health is to create room for conversations about it, which is what I want to do with Tabula Rasa, and is also what I try to do in my everyday life. I'm keenly aware that our society still isn't very well equipped for dealing with mental health stuff. Even just hearing about it can be extremely uncomfortable for most people. But staying comfortable never changed anything, has it? So, I don't know, let's all do our part and start talking about mental health without losing our minds. Thank you very much.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kai. Let me just make sure that we're both on the screen. Great. Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Kai, for your presentation. It was really great, really thoughtful. I
Thank you.
love hearing people's journeys with their mental health. We all have mental health. You know, I know that I've had my fair share of mental health issues and things. And it seems like your journey has led you to some really great insight and places. So thank you for that.
Thank
Um,
you.
no problem.
It's been a
And
wild ride.
yeah, I bet. And I've always loved that Desmond Tutu quote around language and power around it. And I have a question about that. So I
Yeah.
think one of the things that some of us um, struggle with when we become aware of language and its power um, is like, what do you like? How do you best call in someone who uses like non-inclusive or ableist language? What does that look like to you? Like, what is your go-to sort of tactics when you want to tell someone, hey, that's not cool?
I mean, it depends on the environment, of course. But just last week, someone I work with used on Slack, they used the word lame. So
Mm-hmm.
what I did was just be like, oh, by the way, lame is a pretty ableist word, just FYI, in case you didn't know. So I always assume lack of knowledge first rather than going straight in with, you know, but even after I've spent a lot of the past years learning to call people out gently, and I'm still nervous about it. It's still scary. I don't know why. It shouldn't be. Like, you're pointing out that someone is doing something hurtful. It's like, you're standing on my foot. It shouldn't be offensive. You know what I mean? If I tell them they're standing on my foot, but it's still always a bit scary. But yeah, I try to go gently, and I've also learned where to like call my losses and just not die on that uphill battle. Sometimes some people I will not be able to change their minds. Maybe the third person after me will be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like that's part of mental health too, like knowing where your limits are,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Um, yeah, I feel the same way. I feel like there are some times where you need to just choose your battles. And also, like when you're calling out or calling in someone, it's so like you're basically telling them how to treat you,
Or
like
like not even you in some
or
cases, because so what I like to do
yeah.
is I like to call out things that don't affect me in this kind of ally idea that the people who
Mm-hmm.
aren't affected, like I'm queer and trans, so I hope that other people are going to speak up about against transphobia. uh
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm going to speak up about some forms of ableism that don't affect me personally, because it's always less emotional if you're not personally affected. And I feel like
Mm-hmm.
it's my job to, like, we split the emotional labor kind of stuff, you know what I mean? Yeah. But it's always scary because also it always feels like you're interrupting a conversation. So it's like conversation, ableism, conversation, and you're like, I should answer the actual question, but I should probably also mention that thing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's difficult.
Yeah,
It's
it's
difficult.
difficult. Yeah. But it sounds like it's part of the work of just being a good human being, being a good ally.
You'd hope so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, ask you more questions, where
Yeah.
can they? Mm-hmm.
That was on my last slide, but didn't show long enough, I guess. I am the grumpy NB everywhere, pretty much. Tabula Rasa is at tabularasa.org. That's tabula with two O's. And yeah, I've got a link tree for the grumpy NB setup, so you can find all links to me and to Tabula Rasa there. Feel free to contact me, and if you have any questions you're not comfortable asking, like in a public forum like this, please feel free to get in touch.
That's great. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kai. It
Thank you
was
for
great.
having
It's great
me.
to like meet you as well.
Yeah.
Like I added you on LinkedIn. I was really
I
excited
know.
to meet
It's
you,
great.
and I hope we can stay connected. And I
Absolutely.
hope this talk brings more people to all of the work that you're doing. And yeah, so
I
yeah,
really hope
thank
so. I'm very grateful that a language focused conference decided to have me do this talk. It's pretty cool.
yeah, it is pretty cool, definitely.
Thank you.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Cheers.
Yeah, take care.
Bye.